Well, I'm extremely honored and really very happy to host the book authors, Dr. John Marshall and Liza Marshall, who wrote Off Our Chests, a book that I immensely enjoyed reading. And you could actually read my review about the book in the next few weeks. We're going to talk about the book very casually. I hope you get to learn a lot about what led to writing this book. But before we start, I just want to make sure just folks know who you are, John and Liza. So, John, just briefly who you are and what you do, and same for Liza, and then we'll get into the book.
Well, Liza was dumb enough to marry me a real long time ago. I talked her into that during college, and we've been married a very, very long time, and we have really supported each other through our different careers. But I found my way to being an oncologist, and I work at Georgetown University, where I've worked forever, honestly. And you stay a place long enough, you end up being in charge of junk, as you know. And so I'm the chief of the division. And focused in GI cancers, and lucky enough to have been supported by the Rouge family, the Otto J. Rouge family, in helping us to establish the Otto J. Rouge Center for the Cure of GI Cancers. And sort of one of the underlying themes of my career is to have been jealous of the success of breast cancer. Georgetown Lombardi has been known forever as a breast cancer center, really since Mark Lippman joined many, many years ago, and has always had that focus. And to be the GI cancer guy in that sea of pink has really been an uphill battle, and one that's sparked a lot of jealousy and angst about it. And I know Liza's heard too much about this altogether, so I'm amazed that she was willing to write a book together. But Liza really is responsible for 4/5 of my career, having been there to support, listen to, and be there for us and our family.
I'm curious to know how you did that calculation. But anyway.
What's the 1/5 that's mine? Yeah. But so anyway, she has her own career as well, or has had her own career. So I'll let her.
We're going to talk about your jealousy about breast cancer, because boy, do you make it very clear in the book, which I appreciate your bravery. Liza, a little bit about you and what you do, and we realize that you do think John is more attractive than George Clooney, but go ahead, tell us.
He was more readily accessible anyway. I trained as a lawyer after John finished medical school. I went to law school and worked for, I don't know, about 10 years doing communications law, representing mostly cellular telephone companies. And then as John's career started to take off, and he literally started to take off on planes once or twice a week, it became apparent that with our children at home, we really needed one of us to be around a little more. So I stopped working in the early or mid two noughts, I guess we call those, and became what I like to call a professional volunteer at that point. So I served on the board of the children's school, and became involved, have been very involved with church for many years, and our church, and then also became involved with an organization called Hope Connections for Cancer Support, which actually at that time was part of the wellness community, and is now its own entity here in the Washington area. And I served on the founding board of that, and I'm now running a campaign for them, and have been involved with them really ever since they started in about 2005.
And as you read in the book, she keeps us all straight. So she's the rudder in the water for so many people, not just me and our children, but so many organizations and people around us. So
for those who know you, John, it's a full-time job to keep you in line. But the first thing, the book, and for listeners who are listening to this, and I hope you all read the book, this is really the story of Liza when you were diagnosed with breast cancer in 2006. And how John, as a medical oncologist, became a caregiver for you, and you both wrote from your own points of view. It's a fascinating way to describe the story, because each one is writing a chapter after another. And I want to delve a little bit into some of the details that struck me as a reader, and I'm an avid book reader, so I love reading books. But the first thing that I wanted to know is what, and from you, John, maybe, why did you decide to write the book? Because this is 15 years later, and I was trying to understand why you chose to write the book 15 years later, and I wasn't able to figure it out. So what got you to say, you know what, obviously you didn't write it today, you started a year ago maybe, but what got you to decide to write the book?
Well, there's a longer story. I mean, for me, it ends up being therapy. It was something that I really, it's a message I wanted to share, and Liza was a willing partner in sharing that message about our world, our sort of reflections on the world that we live in as cancer care providers, as all the different angles, patient angle, caregiver angle, clinical research. It's really a personal look from the other side of the room, if you will, of this industry that I've been a part of my entire career. And I thought we had a useful story to tell for others, whether that was new couples just entering this club they never wanted to be a member of, or even, I think about our trainees, our faculty, and sharing our story in the hopes that it would help them too, that it was helpful to me to write it, but it helped them too. But the real story of why we wrote it is friends. Maybe you share. Yeah.
Well, we didn't really even think about it. I said, I never kept a diary. I never kept a blog. We were sort of, I think, ready to put this in the rearview mirror as soon as we were done with treatment. And in 2013, a local magazine actually wrote an article about us, focused somewhat on the topic of the book, more sort of on the humorous piece, how we handled it, as with John being an oncologist. And a friend of ours said at the time, you all really should write a book about this, which we tried to do in 2013, but our children were still at the age at which they weren't needy, but they needed us. And we both were very busy with the things we were doing. And we just really couldn't get it off the ground or get enough written to make sense. And so sadly, it kind of required John having, I think, burnout from the work he was doing. And as you know, he talks a lot in the book about the burnout that his work and my diagnosis created for him as he tried to make treatment for his own patients more similar to what I had received as a part of insider of the Georgetown Lombardi community. So anyway, his burnout led to his being able to take a sabbatical, so silver lining, and which gave us the opportunity to take some time to work finally on the book, really to have uninterrupted 4 months that we could really write and figure out how we were going to put it together and go through all the process of getting it published.
And Liza, the book has one chapter written by John, one chapter written by Liza, and so on. And there's last couple of chapters written by you both together. Was this your idea, his idea? Like, how did you, because I actually, when I first started to read the book, I was wondering how you're going to do it, because I didn't know how you're going to both write the book. And then I realized the structure, which I really enjoyed. Whose idea was that?
Well, it was our friend Mary Ann Segedy-Mazak, who is who's had the idea for the book originally and is an editor and a writer herself, and so she really, I think, is the visionary of how this book got put together. But what she recognized, I think, and we veered a little away from this. The original concept was more of the kind of looking at telling the same story, but from different perspectives, which we do in there, but it has gone beyond that to, I think, a more universal, allowing John to really speak about a lot of the things that positions he has taken over the years on cancer care and, the good, bad, and the ugly, I guess, of cancer care in this country, and what sorts of things might be done to improve it. So it's, as I say, it was a process, but we have to give Mary Ann credit for the initial idea.
And John, did you compare notes? Because sometimes, like, I still remember there's one chapter when you talk about the wig as Liza saw it, and then the wig as John saw it. Do you compare his chapter and say, oh my God, what did you just say?
Well, actually, we wrote a book and a half, because we cut out a lot of what we wrote in the end. But So before we had seen each other's, we went to separate places. We were on sabbatical in Oxford. It was a beautiful place at Campion Hall. And I would go down to the library and Liza would stay in the flat and we would spend the morning writing. And we didn't actually show each other what we had written until November, I guess it was, of that academic year. And then we compared notes and we found out we in fact had both written about the wig and had written very differently about the wig. And no, we didn't compare notes. And in fact, when we first read each other's versions, we had to survive that maritally, right? So that, because we wrote very personal things that was probably for the first time we said any of that to each other is in what we wrote, right? We would never would have said it in real time. And in fact, the importance of the time gap you brought forward of the 15 years, I think allowed a lot of that to mature and be safe space now to actually say it to each other. And I suspect most couples going through a cancer diagnosis like this have these thoughts that this is in their heads, but they can't say them. And so maybe, just maybe, if they read through this book, they'll look at each other and say, you thinking that? You thinking that? Mm-hmm. And open some discussions.
Now, you start your book by courageously admitting how much you hated breast cancer research and breast cancer. And I was reading, I'm like, oh my God. I didn't know, I knew of John, of course. Everybody who is a medical oncologist knows of John's accomplishment, but I actually was not aware of that side of you, John, in terms of what we call it, the jealousy of breast cancer. Now, tell me the truth. Were you scared to admit this to the entire world when you wrote this?
I made the first part of my career doing that. I would open every talk with what ended up being a brown ribbon joke, right? So, and I would always, in fact, pick on breast cancer, or at least call out the 10 times more funding than all the other cancers, and the jealousy, and yes, some resentment that I had as we were rolling out, an oxaliplatin or an irinotecan or some medicines that had some impact. But not really realizing the true benefit that I was watching in the breast cancer space. So we may need to take a pause.
No problem.
We don't. Yeah, we're.
So and then even in the book you have several of chapters have actual excerpts of an entire lecture you gave or something. And do you keep those? Help me understand these, because if you have the title of the lecture and what you gave, and oftentimes you're obviously bad-mouthing breast cancer, but I'm trying, were these lectures that you keep a script of, or you just recounted?
They're recounted, but they were things I wanted to get off my chest, and I wrote them down in sort of book format, and then our editorial team thought it would be smart actually to sort of add a third voice to the book, and that is my voice on a podium or in front of an audience. And because I spend a lot of my time there, and basically that's where most of those messages were initially delivered, and still to this day, depending on the group in front of me, delivered. So we thought that would be a good way to, in a way, break up the book a little bit and make it a different sort of book. At one point, we all saw it as a different kind of book. I sort of saw it as a how-to book. So if somebody was just being diagnosed with cancer, how do you navigate a cancer center? How do you, what do you need to know about cancer and clinical trials and all of that? And it, of course, became more than that, but I didn't want to lose those elements. So I thought it was important to give some of those basic overviews for the lay reader.
I was trying to assess the book at a very high level, and at least in my mind, I was thinking there's a lot in the book about who you both are as people, just people, not necessarily as a doctor and a lawyer, or just as people and as a couple. And there are elements of the book where you talk about certain things pertaining to healthcare and cancer in general and cancer care. And I think, you know, they intersect, but I just found it very interesting. And I always wonder, as a book author, well, let me back up. As a physician, when you are taking care of all patients, how much are you willing to put of yourself out there that people become aware of that? For example, you know, we learned a lot about the importance of religion in your life, and church, and which is great, but you could imagine that, you know, some patients may not relate to that. It's like almost politics. Something. I think religion and politics are always tricky because you are going to take care of patients of all kinds of political affiliations or religious beliefs. As a book author and as a physician who is going to interact with the public, do you think about that? Do you think, should I really tell them about this, or do that? What's your thought process when you were talking about that?
Well, we're not very secret. We live our lives on our sleeves. We tell people what we think. But this is a different level. What we wrote is an even more deeper level because it's really what you're feeling at the moment too. But with my patients, and that's part of why the burnout really occurred, is that after the experience with Liza going through the cancer, I thought I was a great doctor. I thought I was the best doctor ever, as many doctors do. And then having experienced it from the other side of the room, I really realized that it can be even better, but it involves then a personal connection. And when you have that personal connection, when you give yourself to your patients, particularly in our line of work, body and soul, mind and soul, then you're at risk, because particularly in my kind of practice, a very high percentage of the patients will die on my watch. And so it hurts. How does a physician, do you keep your objectivity? The more you give up your objectivity, probably the better doctor you are in some ways, at least in personal care of a patient. But you also then can't maintain that. So you've got to balance all of those things. And the experience with Liza's cancer and our experience afterwards was really what taught me all of that.
I was just gonna say, you talked about your faith with your patients before that, or no?
Yeah. So, but I wouldn't, this wouldn't be on, I wouldn't have like insignias on my white coat. No. But if a patient expressed faith to me, they would, I would say, I understand. And I because different people bring in, to be blunt, different people bring in different gods. And so, or what their definition of religion and faith is. And so I wasn't exclusive or in fact evangelical in any way. In fact, the opposite. But if I still, if a patient said, "Would you pray with me, doctor?" Generally, I'm like, no, because that was, even though we may share the same religion and the same God, that was crossing the line. It's sort of like the chapter on never go to funerals. That's crossing the line, right? That's an expression of faith that to me is too personal. So still, you want me over here as your objective physician, and I can only blow that wall down so low to be as close as I can with that patient without it hurting me too much.
Yeah, Liza, you were diagnosed with this disease years ago, a decade and a half before you wrote the book. As I was reading, you definitely recount every detail in a very, I felt I was with you. I mean, I felt I was with you in the room. I felt I was with you when you got your bone scan. I felt with you when the other doctors were talking about your case, leaving you in the room by yourself as if you don't even exist, which is something I want to talk about. But the one thing I want you to tell us about is how did you tell your children? How did that conversation go? Try to bring us back to that moment.
Yeah, so we decided really that the day we got the diagnosis, and we got the diagnosis, we went in the afternoon immediately for scans. So things happened very quickly for me because John could make them happen quickly, and I think my doctors could as well. And so we decided the children had been at my parents' all afternoon. It was strange. Our daughter had seen John at school, which was strange. There was a way we could have gotten away with not telling them, but it didn't feel right. As John says, I mean, we are not only with other people pretty much hearts on our sleeve, but we are with our children as well, and tell them, what's going on in our lives, maybe at high level, but generally. So we felt that we needed to talk to them that evening, and we talked through what we were going to say, and John nicely volunteered to do it on the theory that he was, one, more experienced, and two, better at controlling his emotions, definitely better at controlling his emotions than I am. So we gave them a simple, mom has breast cancer. She had these tests today. She will have surgery. She will have chemotherapy. She will have radiation. She's fine right now. We hope she will continue to be fine. And do you have any questions? And really, neither one of them had any questions or really reacted in much of they weren't very shocked. As I say, I think our daughter had a pretty good sense there was something going on anyway. And our son was just at a stage of life in which he was focused much more on, as I say in the book, he was focused on girls and applying to high schools and, playing soccer and that type of thing. So anyway, they both reacted in their own personal way. But I think they both took in the information and used it in the way that they needed to use it. And again, we were pretty open. I was bald around the house. They helped us pick out the wig. They were involved in it as much as we could involve them in a way that wasn't weird, I guess, or we hoped wasn't weird.
Our kids are cancer savvy, right? Yeah. They've been on rounds, for God's sakes. They know patients who've died. I mean, they know people who've died of cancer. So this was not a new language. It was not new. I mean, even for fairly young kids. So, I also feel very strongly about this because, generationally, back when my mom died of cancer, that you didn't talk to kids about anything like this. I never said goodbye to my mother. So I was not going to have this happen to my kids. They were going to be in the loop. They were and it almost became a new mission for me to make sure that my patients' children knew what was going on, right? So part of my first visit did it this afternoon is, what do your kids know? Do your kids know you're here? How much do they know about what's going on? Because I actually think it's critically important for that to be as transparent as the kid can handle, and not have two different discussions going on, both for the patient and for the family.
And you do talk about your mom, John. I thought it was very emotional, the way you describe your relationship with her, and I kind of sensed that there was some unfinished emotional, I don't want to say business because it's really more emotional, just some unfinished things inside you about that relationship. And maybe writing about it helped you, but as a reader, I could totally tell how much you loved your mom. I mean, all children should love their mother, but there was something special about that relationship.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that it's hard for me to put my finger on that. Maybe it was just me, maybe it was my age or those things, but we've been talking to others because of the book about this, and it's, who became oncologists. Every oncologist has some sort of family event that inspired them, that we're going to prove it to the next group that we can do better, right? So it's it is, I'm sure it's a motivating factor for a lot of what I do. There's also the point, though, when you die young, you have a really big funeral. I didn't want that for Liza. I want a nice, tiny little funeral for Liza. I don't even want to be at Liza's funeral. So if I can, I'll go first. But the thought of having to relive that, when Liza got diagnosed with what was a bad breast cancer, it just kept going there. I can't do this again. I don't want to do this again. And so I'm very grateful that we didn't. But yeah, it stings, and that's true for a lot of oncologists. So I'm not unique.
Do you ever think, whenever you hear about a non-Hodgkin lymphoma new therapy, do you ever go back and think about your mom?
Oh, that she'd be cured. I mean,
He says that a lot.
I say it a lot. That if she were getting the diagnosis today, she would probably be cured. And I mean, she got cobalt radiation, for God's sakes. So the kinds of things that I know about now, and knowing what she had, CAR T and transplants, and even if she was in trouble. I mean, I still know it's a very bad disease and people die from it. I get that, but the odds are she wouldn't have.
And, going back to the cancer story, it's, by the way, Liza is more funny than you. I just want to make sure you know.
No, she's not.
You're nice to say that.
She's not at all.
And I'll hold that over.
You were able to get me to laugh. I'll share with you that, you talked about something that happens all the time. You say, why do doctors talk about important things when patients are still under anesthesia? And it's true. It is true. I've seen it all the time. Like, it is, I had my parents undergo endoscopies. They're like still, my mother still had not woken up from the colonoscopy. The gastroenterologist walked in and he just bluffed something. And my mom is like in La La Land. Like, I don't know. She was like, but
I had a colonoscopy last June, and the doctor, John came, no, maybe the nurse did anyway. And I said, well, I haven't seen the doctor yet. And they're like, yes, you did. Literally at the moment had no memory of it. Never mind later. So,
but it is true. And I do think it's really, I mean, these are things that we don't really think about because, they just happen in healthcare. But I really want to bring back several concepts that you both talk about. Maybe John discussed a little bit more because I felt he was ranting about a few things, but they're really important. I don't know if they are pearls of medicine or oncology, but they're really important for all of us. And as a caretaker of my own parents, as well as a physician myself, I could totally relate to this. So one of them is shared decision-making. Okay. So I don't know. I mean, shared decision-making is a good concept when you write about an editorial and you write a paper and you sit on a podium and you talk about this, whatever it is. But Liza, you were the patient. I mean, at the end of the day, you come out several times and say, well, I can't make these decisions about something I don't understand very well. Like, what do you expect me to decide on AC plus Taxol? I can't make that decision.
Right.
So take me through your lens about when you hear shared decision making, tell me about that.
Well, I think you're right to start with the fact that it is the goal, I think, for both doctors and patients, that we would all like to think that we can make these decisions together and that the patients can have as much input as they want to have while getting from the doctor as much comprehensible information as they can. I think I'm a lawyer, so I think there are a lot of legal ramifications of that, which also play into this, which we probably don't even think about, and maybe that says that we need to restructure the way, our laws are written, the way HIPAA is written, that kind of thing. But it was definitely very difficult for me, and the source of much anxiety, I would say, as I was, as I received what felt like an information dump, again, even of words that I understood, but they didn't go together in a way that made any sense to me. And then the idea of not understanding what the implications of any of these decisions was going to be. What did side effects really look like? I mean, here's a list of side effects, but I'm filling out ones now for the COVID vaccine, and it asks you about a symptom, and there's a huge range from, a headache to, I think I have a brain tumor. And yet there's only a box to check headache. And so it's, yeah. So, anyway, so I think it is, there's a spectrum in those things that perhaps we don't recognize. And in the cancer case, I think perhaps don't explain very well to patients about what the spectrum of each one of these side effects might be.
I think doctors are chicken when they say, I'm, it's your call. You have to decide in the end. I mean, lean into these things. What would you do? Not if it was your wife or your father. What would you do if it was you? That's what I always teach the fellows is what you should be thinking about is what would you do if this was your diagnosis in this situation to you? You know more than anybody else in the room. And then take the patient there. I mean, give them the rationale of why you decided that. What are the trade-offs you came to personally, and say, well, you may have different values than I do, but at least, pick one. I mean, I think this concept of a patient feeling awkward and asking us, I hate to ask you this, doc, but what would you do? That shouldn't be an embarrassing, unusual question. In the end, it should be this. Surgeons are great at this. You need this operation. You need it today. We're going to do it this way. And here's your recovery. And I don't really think you have a choice. I mean, that's what surgery does. And, with us, it's obviously more vague than that because our endpoints are less clear to patients. Trade-offs are less clear.
Shared decision-making implies that there is symmetry of information between the physician and the patient, and there is not. I mean, I'm sorry, but your patient is not going to know about colorectal cancer like you do. So that's where the difficulty is. But you bring up a good point. I mean, the values, right? I mean, I think you can. I have had patients actually in my career, John, that have declined curative therapy because it would cause hair loss. I have had that. And I will respect that. I said, this is the chop regimen I will get, but you will lose your hair. I'm like, I'm not gonna get chopped. And you feel like you're gonna bang your head against the wall, but you gotta respect the wishes. But aside from that, I struggle with it in terms of the shared decision making. I think you both really outlined this really nicely, the complexity of that. The other way where you actually bring in the shared decision making into the equation when you talk about clinical trials. And I thought this was really fascinating because one trial, Liza, you declined participating in, and another trial you agreed to participate in. And I want to understand from you why you declined one and agreed to another. I also want to understand from you, do you really feel the consent form that they give trials? I mean, are even like, do you even read? Do you understand what you read there?
Yeah, I will start with your last question first. And I still have my consent packet that that was one of the things I looked at as my research and in this book. And I still don't understand it. And I've come out the other side of it, right? I mean, I had, a lot of things. I mean, it's pages and pages and pages that, people, I mean, just a time commitment to read through when you're trying to make these decisions and, all the things that go with that. But you're referring to the neoadjuvant trial? Is that that I declined?
I think the one trial was like just a biopsy. I think it was just it was not interventional. No, it was neoadjuvant. You're right. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. John remembered. I also wasn't sure which one it was. That one because my breast cancer presented in such a strange way, there was nobody had any idea at that point where the tumor actually was. We just knew I had it in my lymph. And the way that trial was described to me was it's going to make your tumor smaller. And then, we'll be able to, then we can decide about what kind of surgery to do. And I sort of thought, well, if we don't know where the tumor is to begin with, how are we going to know after I've done this trial? And I would say talk about shared decision-making. I think I did, well, one could argue whether it's good input or not, I suppose, in retrospect, in that I think the neoadjuvant, that is how breast cancer treatment is administered now. But my surgeon was not enthusiastic for those reasons, I think for staging reasons and for surgery reasons about my getting into that trial. But having said that, I've signed up, I think, for every other trial that came my way, other than choosing between a couple of trials when for adjuvant chemotherapy. And I do really, heartily believe in patients participating in clinical trials.
But I think actually Liza got, maybe treated differently, probably because I was sitting next to her. Because in this case, we had in the same team, multidisciplinary team, and both of these people are still very good friends of ours. So the surgeon was leaning towards surgery, and the med-onc, member of my division, was leaning towards neoadjuvant, this newfangled neoadjuvant concept at the time. And they both had expressed their preference, and then sort of left it to us, right? So we normally, with a single team like that, the current standard is they come out with one joint recommendation, right? And not even within the team saying, well, you could go this way or that way. And so in the end, I think we both sort of, for me, it was get it the hell off of there. I mean, it was like I was afraid of it. And for the same reasons I think you're saying, I was just unpredictable, sudden, acute, really right below inflammatory. And I could just see if it didn't work. I mean, so my own personal emotion here was that if she was even in the 10% that doesn't work frontline, she was going to have chest wall involvement for the rest of her life and never be, and I knew what that looked like. And so it was like, if this is our window, let's do it.
And I think you talked about values too in the shared decision making. And I wasn't that concerned about losing my breast. I mean, it wasn't my choice. I wasn't thinking before I had breast cancer, let's just get rid of those. But in that moment, that just did not seem like that high a priority to me. And it seemed like the safer route.
I mean, for a PG rated book, I mean, John Marshall comes out and says he's not a breast guy. He says that in the book.
Yeah, thank God.
I married the right woman.
Yeah.
The entire world now knows. But Liza,
you don't have to guess what kind of guy I am. So that just it gives everyone else an open mind. Yeah.
But Liza, I want to go back to what you just said about the dumping of information, because I do think, I'll share with you this. Sometimes if I take my mom to the doctor or my dad to the doctor, this is a classic. Like I'm sitting with them, they're sitting there, and the doctor is speaking, whatever it is. There's always a nod, yes. Now everything is nodding. I walk out. It's like, what happened? Like, what did he say? I'm like, what do you mean? Why are you nodding? Like, just like ask. Right. I'm trying to be the caretaker. Right. It's very difficult for me to take away, to be the physician and the caretaker. And I do sense John struggled with this a little bit. But how much would the dumping of information that you were getting was because you were the wife of an oncologist, and there's, it was difficult. I always wonder when the physician walks into the room, they still know that you are John's wife. You're not, quote unquote, an ordinary patient to them.
Right.
Not only you would be a VIP by virtue of who John is, but also you're educated. I don't know. Like I feel there's.
Right. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, and I think that there was language. Certainly, nobody had to tell me what a clinical trial was. And I mean, I say that lots of people don't know what clinical research is, and obviously John was very involved in it. So there was a lot of language I did know already, and I knew what chemotherapy was, and I had some vision of what this was that was pretty accurate at a level that was probably higher than many people's. I even knew that there were different kind of, receptors, hormone receptors and things like that. So while triple negative had to be explained to me, at least I, again, knew what an estrogen receptor was and a progesterone receptor. So yes, I think it probably did lead to some of these conversations being at a higher level. And perhaps there were some assumptions in there that I knew more than they thought I did about the drugs, and that what the names of the drugs were and what they did and that type of thing.
One of my favorite sections she does is she's sitting on the crinkly paper, and I was the caregiver, but in a white coat. I think
You're going to be able to tell he hasn't read my part of the book, because that's not quite the story I tell. I'm sitting on a chair.
Oh, you're sitting on a chair. I don't know.
He has.
Anyway, and we started talking in tumor board pace, right? Yeah, we were skipping things, and we all knew what was going on, and the poor thing was just it's like all these words flying over.
He does say that. I mean, that's one of the things that, I mean, she was saying that, they're talking about me and as if I don't even exist in the room. And I do think sometimes physicians do that all the time. But one of the things that was really also kind of, the burnout and as a busy oncologist becomes honestly very difficult to even be a caretaker at the same time. I mean, it's very clear how busy you are. And I don't know, John, if 2006 you were the division chief back then or not, but pretty much you've got the administrative responsibilities, then you've got the research and the clinical care. And even Liza says she had to schedule her emergencies on non-Tuesdays. Like she can
she was very nice that way. She was very, I told you she's thoughtful. And just
how difficult was it for you to really rearrange everything around Liza's schedule? Because honestly, sometimes I even struggle to get an appointment for something. Like it's so, our life is so fast paced.
No, I say I failed at it. Liza says I didn't do that bad a job, but it was.
I do, just so everybody can hear. I affirm that I say that.
I think you did okay. I think you did okay.
It made it possible for me to sort of keep juggling, because right when you're young and you have cancer, somebody has to keep working to pay for the insurance and get the insurance, and somebody has to watch the kids and manage those things. Even though Liza was able to do, I would say 90+% of everything through all of that. But to be there as sort of a helper and supporter. We had great community. I learned the value of the village through all of this, and they just came out of the woodwork and helped us, and I learned to accept it and welcome it. Had to help manage it, but accept it and welcome it, so that I could keep going. And initially everything kind of slowed down, and the people around me let me slow down. But I have to tell you, those few weeks while first diagnosed, surgery, and all of those things, and in my own clinic, it was very hard to keep my mind on the patient in front of me, knowing what was going on. So it took all my concentration powers at that point to do that. But when things settled, and this is where I think I sort of, I don't know if I was running away or slipped or whatnot, but when things, she's in her cycles and the like, I started back on the road again, and not as much early on, and it ramped back up over time. But the lifestyle of you're asked to come give a talk somewhere. Well, it's exciting, and you want to go do that, and it's a break from your day job, and it's fun to do. And so I said yes to those things, and part of that's part of your career too. You're expected to go to these meetings. You're expected to be present. So I did do that probably more than most would have done, I think. And so that's where I think I fell down. But I relied on others, relied on so many people to take care.
The other concept you both talk about is second opinions. I found it a very interesting concept, and I'm with you, John. I've always recommended to my patients, even if it's a run-of-the-mill type, like if you feel comfortable, get a second opinion. But you also admit that you wanted Liza to choose Georgetown. What are your thoughts with the second opinion, Liza, and what made you choose one place? What was it because John worked there, you chose that, or from a lens of a patient who gets several opinions, what are the factors that make you decide where you receive your care at the end?
John working there was probably a big part of it, in that I knew this was going to be talking about trying to manage. It was going to be complicated for both of us, and the logistics of getting to the other doctor's office for chemotherapy were going to be very complicated and require bringing probably other people in. And feeling is I'm not good at imposing on people, and I felt as if we were imposing on people enough. So I think that was part of it. I just really love Georgetown, I will say. I mean, I've been going to Georgetown for doctors since before I knew John. I mean, I grew up here. And so it was a comfortable place to me. It was a warm place to me. I won't say I knew my way through it. I still needed a map for about the first half of chemotherapy, probably, to find my way from one end of the hospital to the other. But it's, and I mean, it's a world-class, it was a world-class, it is a world-class cancer center. To turn that down seemed not to make any sense unless there were a really strong reason. The privacy concern was a real concern for me, whether I would be comfortable. I mean, talk about not understanding the spectrum of side effects. I'm not sure I really could forecast how my privacy might or might not be, I don't mean invaded, but
speaking of privacy, John does mention that it's like when the MA calls the name in the hallway, with the name HIPAA went out the window. That is one of my pet peeves when I was in clinical practice. I tried very hard to stop that trend. It was impossible. So there was no privacy.
Yeah. So I'll never forget when we were fellows. We had just had our first, Liza had just had Charlie at Georgetown. And the fellow comes, and we were in clinic and it was busy, as you know, when you're a fellow. And she comes up to me and says, "So I see Charlie's bilirubin's coming down." So she's gone into my son's chart, right? And like, really? You realize that, when the EMRs first came out, it was sort of a curiosity because you can peek into whatever anybody's doing. So I really wanted her to go get another opinion so that she could choose that privacy issue. This was a world-class private practice group that could take care of her too, take care of us too. But so in the end, again, we're not very private people.
Yeah, and you talk about the privacy as well. Even John, when you got the pathology report of Liza, and you kind of were surprised about it because, like, well, you go through this, and I think as a reader, I did feel that I would have loved to know a little bit more about the conflict there, but I thought you mentioned this, that why did I get the pathology reports? Why did they CC me on that?
Yeah, I still don't know. Still don't know.
There's the other thing is, John always has a sense of humor, but there are a few, some of these sarcasm thing that definitely comes out. I would say the one thing made me laugh and one thing made me nervous. So the one thing that made me laugh, and when you say, what happened to Liza may have been, I read this verbatim, retribution for my long disparagement of the breast cancer machine. John, karma is a bitch. You know that.
Yeah, no. So this was it. I was getting it. A big karma hit right there.
Well, I like to point out that I was the one who got it. So I just,
yeah. But the one thing that, and you'll have to help me through this. I was a little bit, I read this a couple of times. I was trying to understand. You were talking about telehealth and how things might change if you just go into a drive-through, you tell people your symptom, they tell you your diagnosis, and you're painting kind of weird picture to where medicine was heading, and then you were able to somehow like below the belt kind of kick into direct-to-consumer advertising somewhere, even when you were wearing a nice white coat and so forth. You confused me there. So what was going on through your mind as you were writing all this?
No, I clearly think that healthcare is becoming increasingly automated and remote. And the pandemic has helped make it such. There are some efficiencies to that. The second opinion you're talking about, much easier to get from almost anywhere in the country now. You don't even have to go there. You can just dial up and get your second opinion. But you have to beam the prescription over to the correct pharmacy, then it has to clear all the financial hurdles, and then if it does your retina scan and you're still the same person, they'll dispense your penicillin. So and what the role of the physician is going to be, we work together on trying to make precision medicine happen, right? So is there going to be a time when you come up and, give a little blood sample or you spit in a cup and it basically, tells you what's going on with you, and you don't need the physician because the AI and will generate it. But I do think driving patients, the direct-to-consumer issue is sort of, to me, different. We really are the only country that does all of this marketing. I'm part of that marketing too, on some level. I've certainly done that business in my career, But the
were you nervous somebody will call you on this and say, why did you write that part?
Sure. I mean, I think everything about this book, I'm very nervous about tomorrow, quite honestly. Books land tomorrow, and people that maybe aren't as friendly or understanding, we're going to read them. And but we do want, the idea here is that everybody's, we tell it the way we see it, and it's no one group that's perfect, right? We're all flawed. And we all could do a better job at improving outcomes. The goal here is to cure patients of cancer. That's our goal. How do we best work together to do that? We're spending a lot of money already. How do we spend it more wisely? And the hope is that just that reflection, just to have a discussion about this point is good, right? It gets us thinking about it.
Liza, as a patient, does direct-to-consumer advertising bother you?
It bothers me on a global level, I would say. I mean, I don't think it's a good idea personally, I guess, but I don't think I'm personally influenced by it. Maybe that's because I don't have any of the, at least at this point, have any of the diseases or issues that are being marketed to. But talk again about an information dump. I mean, the idea of being that for me, the idea of being able to assess the appropriateness of a medicine that is advertised in the middle of a golf tournament I'm watching, either with the version in which they don't have to list any of the possible side effects, in which everything just looks beautiful and everybody looks healthy and healed, or the version in which they list all the side effects as fast as they possibly can because they're required to. I don't find either one of those, I think, an effective way of communicating with patients.
But I have counseled companies to do it. So this is the conflict I feel, is that how do you get a physician to be aware of a new medicine, a new test, when it's so busy? Like, you're just, as physicians, you're just drinking from a fire hose of information. So you target the patient who might be listening in, who might fit that category, to the next time they go in and ask their patient about it. I learned that lesson from the breast cancer world. So the advocacy groups became very effective at educating the breast cancer community. So they knew what was out there. And if you were going to be an effective breast cancer oncologist, you better know what's going on. So that consumer physician link drove it so that private oncologists in general know more about breast cancer, I would argue, than any other cancer because of that. So I think it's an effective way to bring the whole wave along of progress.
I mean, the book in general is just very, look, as a reader, I could tell how honest the book is from both sides and how raw it is. I mean, just very honest. I don't believe that you were filtered in expressing however you felt individually or towards each other. Were you at all scared that the book might grow you apart as opposed to bring you together? You do actually write towards the end that it actually brought you together. Was there, I mean, it could have done the opposite effect. Was that at all a factor or a fear, Liza, and then John?
I don't know that it was for me. I mean, John's over here nodding, so perhaps it was for him. But while there were things we said in the book that we hadn't said to each other, I think most of the things we both had a pretty good sense of where the other one was coming from. So, well, again, while things were individually a surprise, perhaps, I don't think the gestalt of how we both felt was. So so no, I guess is my answer to the question. I wasn't worried about that. I was looking forward to it, perhaps, in a way too.
How did it bring you together? Like how did it make you closer to each other?
We do Zooms together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We now have it. Yeah. Well, go ahead. I mean, you were.
No, I mean, it was a project to do jointly. We didn't have to publish it, right? We could have just written it, shared it, and said that we shouldn't share that with anybody. To me, the risk is in sharing this, because we are honest. I mean, we're telling, and we say the good things and what our perception of the bad things are. So so there is a risk of all of that. But with the working together has been fun. I mean, what a better way to spend a pandemic, quite honestly. We were stuck in this house together for most of it, and it didn't feel like being stuck. I mean, we had stuff to do, and so we were lucky again. Just another moment of luck.
You published yourself? There's a publisher. I couldn't tell. It says published by John Marshall. You have a publisher, no?
Yeah, Idea Press Publishing, which is
that's what I thought.
publisher
Yeah.
here.
What was the best thing about writing the book and the worst thing about writing the book from both of you?
The best thing really was the doing it together. I was, as we were just talking about, John was answering that or giving you that last thought, I was thinking we were very much on the same trajectory, which I think is very similar to our marriage. We believe a lot of the same things, and even his controversial stuff. As I say in the book, I certainly was on the, breast cancer gets a whole lot of attention, and GI cancers and a lot of other cancers do not. And so anyway, I don't think there were any major disagreements. We have minor disagreements about things, but as I say, that the book, I think, reflects our marriage in that regard. The being in Oxford was really the best part of it, I think. But the writing there was really wonderful. And we really have enjoyed working together. It's really the first, other than raising children, it's the first project we've ever really done together. So that was fun. The worst part. Well, I know what it was for John, but
what's that? I don't even know.
Oh, I was going to say being edited.
Oh yeah, I hated that.
What was it for me? I don't know.
I could picture that on John, reviewer.
Oh, you know exactly. So I would work hard. I would send it out to our we call her our midwife for the book, and we were over in England, so we'd wake up to an email in our inbox from the night.
Track changes.
Oh, mine was just red. I mean, just ripped to shreds. And Liza, with a C frowny face, right? And Liza was getting all these A pluses and, good job and give us more. And
well, but it's actually pretty interesting, because I always wondered, and I struggle with this myself. I think we're all trained to write scientific articles where you're really writing to a medical journal. And since I started writing to the lay public, and I have to figure out a little bit of a different tone. And clearly your book is not meant only to professors in the field. You want everybody to read it. So I think that's really probably, I think I struggle with that when I'm writing to the lay public. But anything else, John, that if you think back that, like what was the worst thing about writing this book? If maybe there's not, but maybe there is.
No, I mean, it's been the initial feeling of, can we really do this, was something I wasn't sure of. And it wasn't really until we started to see it come together that feeling went away, that it was I've just expressed to others that this was really therapeutic for me. So there was a part of this that was charmed and perfect timed, and the sabbatical and all of that was much needed, as you know. We've talked about that before. So that, but the grading was bad. But other than that, there weren't really, entering the book publishing world is everything has its own language, has its own process. And it's not
believe
simple.
me, I'm in that process as well. But let me ask you this: is there going to be a documentary on this?
Oh yeah, yeah. George Clooney's playing me.
Yeah, it's not a documentary.
Yeah.
I can see it actually. I can see
that. See?
I can see George Clooney. I can see the documentary.
Yeah.
I mean, but I can see. I mean, I think there's I think there are elements of this book that I don't believe has been told in this manner. So I could see it, but I presume you'll find out in the next few months how that actually goes. John or Liza, is there anything else I should have asked you about the book that I did not ask, or you want listeners to know? I personally enjoy it tremendously. I think everybody should read it, and I want to write a review on it as well. But maybe there are certain things you want listeners to know, or you want to tell them I may have not captured in the interview.
John always has something.
Well, no, I was going to say that it's not just a breast cancer book in our hearts, because it's got a big pink ribbon on the cover of it, and it's about cancer. But I actually think it's about any serious illness or dealing with the strain in a relationship and the like. So we do hope that I'd be interested to see what the non-cancer world thinks of the book, quite honestly, and who doesn't have a good sense of all of the language and the experience, and how that will resonate with others. Because we wrote it with that intent, or at the end we thought it might just help others too in that sense, and it's the home run if it's entertaining and people take it to the beach with them. That'll be a win.
I think it was a great read, and we're taping this for context on May 3rd, because by the time this will air, the book will be available to be bought. I believe it's available today, May 3rd. They can actually buy it, but this will air in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much.
You are awesome for doing
thank
this.
you
Thank you
so
for
much.
Oh,
It's
thank you.
nice to meet you.
This was great. I think it's really it's a beautiful book, and I'm so happy that you're doing so well, Liza, and I hope you continue to do very well and continue to give John a hard time.
Yeah.
That's her job. She does it very well. So.
I just have to express sympathy for you too. You're talking about taking care of your parents. I'm in the same boat, and it is its own perspective on the medical system and how doctors communicate with people, and all of that is complicated. So
the usual stuff. Thank you so much.
All right, take care. Thanks again. That's really nice of you. Thank you.